As a theoretical background for the module, we need to explore the current versus ideal future concept a little more in detail. The current situation or the current state of a system was brought about or came into being as a result of decisions made in the past and co-production of the outer and inner environment throughout the past. This brought the system to where it is now. And this configuration of the system drives it into a current future, and this is called momentum. So the force that drives us forward is momentum. To illustrate momentum, we can use the analogy of the tanker. If we picture an oil tanker fully laden, going at full speed, maybe in a fog, towards a sandy beach, it will actually glide out of the beach even if it can't drive in the water anymore. The momentum will propel it forward. And the larger the tanker is, the heavier it is, the faster it goes, and the less resistance there is on the beach, the further inland the tanker will go. So the same is true. The larger our organizations are, the greater the momentum will be and the more difficult it will be to change. We could also picture a ship in a fog suddenly seeing an iceberg or a rock in front of it, and the captain will not be able to turn the ship beyond momentum. The captain may have the choice to hit the iceberg or to capsize the boat if it is turned around at too great speed beyond momentum. So we cannot change systems beyond their momentum. In an organization context, it means a large organization has a lot of momentum and cannot be changed overnight. In society as well, large systems like an education system take several years to change. And our 4-year election periods are a huge hindrance in managing societal change because the momentum of the change would take longer than the periods of elections are. The momentum drives the system into its current future. A current future really implies more of the same behavior. It represents the current logic. I carry on doing what I'm doing. The organization carries on with its current strategies, its current markets, its current policies. It is really a more of the same. And this allows forecasting, or this is the basis of forecasting. What we do in forecasting, we extrapolate where would we end up if we carry on doing what we are doing now. Of course, there will be environmental change. So as we move into the future, our interaction with the environment will change, and that gives rise to alternative current futures. Typically, the current future situation involves deterioration, and we illustrate that with the boiling frog. The boiling frog syndrome means that if you're taking a frog and put it into cold water and we start heating the water slowly, it will not notice that it is getting hotter and hotter and will happily boil to death. By comparison, if we were to take a frog and throw it into hot water, it will jump out immediately. So why does the frog not detect gradual change? Because apparently it has a nervous system that doesn't detect gradual change before it is too late. What would be some of the examples or the relevance of the boiling frog? For example, in an organization, we could observe a decline of sales. Every year, a couple of percentage points less. So if we compare this year compared to last year, it may be only 2 or 3% worse than it was last year. So this is not necessarily a calamity. And if we compare next year to this year, there may be another 2% less. So we don't notice how bad the situation gets unless we are comparing it to larger intervals of time. Suddenly, over 5 to 10 year periods, we are talking a decline in market share of maybe 20 or 30%. And this is huge. But from one year to another, we don't notice this. In our private life, we may just gradually put on weight a little bit one year after another. So this year it's not so much worse than last year. But if you're looking at it over periods of 5 or 10 years and forecast the continuation of that trend into the future, then there may be very serious health or other results looming. And because of the alternative current futures, we don't know what the results would be if we carry on with our current behaviors. Would it be a high road or a low road scenario? If we carry on smoking more and more as we do every year, will we die of lung cancer? Or will we die of heart disease? Or will we stay healthy? So we do not know exactly what the outcome will be, but in general, it involves deterioration. The current future also contains contradictions. What we mean by that is not everything gets worse. Some things get better. Technology, for example. Many solutions in society are there that weren't there a few years ago in medicine. So some things get better, some things get worse. And when we are doing scenario development, when we look at alternative futures, we are putting together related variables, some of them negative, some of them positive, and that is how we can design the range of forecasts from a lower to a higher road, as we sometimes call it in scenario development. If the current future is undesirable, it is time that we are designing an ideal future. The ideal future resides in conceptual space. What we mean by that, it is part of the information field that I have been talking about in the first module. So the information field is that field of ideas that informs, puts form into the manifestation of a system. So if we have an ideal future towards which we strive, then the ideal future informs our behavior and makes us develop in a different way. Ideals by definition cannot be achieved, they can only be approximated. Why is it useful to have an ideal future if one cannot achieve it? Well, precisely because one can carry on striving towards it, and it remains valid as long as the system exists. So, for example, if as a person I want to have a happy marriage and I design an ideal around that, then as long as I and my partner are alive, that vision will remain valid. Or if I have the vision of being fit, vital, healthy, then this is a valid vision throughout my life. Even if I'm fit now or healthy now, it is a state that can be even improved on. I can be healthier, fitter, etc. Likewise, in an organization, if the organization has a good vision, it can carry on developing towards that vision. One of my favorite visions is Odys Vorsprung durch Technik, leaping ahead through technology, which very clearly describes what the driving force in that organization is and what its vision is. It wants to be ahead of the competition through its technology. So even if it has superior technology at one moment in time, the competition will catch up with it, and to stay ahead, to leap ahead, it needs to have the next technological improvement. What is important is that the logic of the ideal future is not the logic of the current situation. One needs to think differently in order to produce an ideal future. We can take the example of health. If I'm analyzing the existing situation, which may be diseased, the one thing I will not find in that situation is health. Likewise, if I look at a diseased marriage or a diseased organization, I can analyze it, but what I will not find there is happiness or profitability. One will not find that in the current situation. So the logic of the problem is not the logic of the solution. What that implies is that in order to formulate an ideal future, one needs to think differently. One needs to have a different logic of functioning, of behavior than the current situation. So for example, if the current situation produces disease, then I need to find a logic that produces health. And analyzing the current situation does not give me an understanding necessarily of what the healthy situation looks like. If I'm producing an unhappy marriage at the moment, for example, analyzing the unhappy situation will not allow me to understand the logic of happiness because it requires different functioning, different behavior. Likewise, if we go into an organization that is problem-riddled or a society that is problem-riddled, analyzing the problems will not reveal the ideals or the solutions. One needs a shift in logic to do that. And the logic of the ideal future is a higher order logic. What that means is that it transcends the situation of the current future. For example, once a year there's Heart Week, and they tell us to prevent heart disease from happening, we should change our nutrition, exercise more, stop smoking, manage stress, and so on. When there is Cancer Week, we hear the same strategies. Change the nutrition, do more exercise, manage your stress, supplementation, and a couple of other strategies. If we add to that prevention of specific diseases like malaria prevention, if you go into a malaria area, or a protection to not get HIV, AIDS, and if we add to that maybe some basics like hygiene, then we have maybe 10 strategies that create health. And creating health eliminates all disease. There may be hundreds of diseases caused by hundreds of different strategies, but to create health requires a few strategies. It is a higher order logic. Likewise, when as an organization consultant I come into an organization that's problem-riddled, we typically have many different kinds of problems. And often there are many different solutions proposed. But if one goes in to create a systemic learning organization, this is a higher order logic. It is like creating health in the organization. And by creating that particular learning organization, the existing problems dissolve, they disappear, like health disappears or dissolves disease. So the ideal future is required for dissolving the problems in the current situation. To do that, we need to backcast. So the ideal future requires backcasting to the current situation. What that implies is, once we have formulated what the ideal state of the body or the marriage or the organization should be, we need to backcast what are the strategies, the courses of action we need to take to start moving towards a more ideal future. And this is what we refer to as backcasting. How do we move towards the ideal future? Well, once we have backcast the ideal future and determined the courses of action we have to take, this is normally done through implementation planning, we have at every moment in time a choice to move towards the current situation or to move towards the ideal future. For example, if I have formulated a new career for myself, and one of the strategies is to get an MBA, then I have the choice of going to the cinema, as I used to do twice a week, or learning for my MBA. So every week when I had my meeting with my friends to go to the cinema, I have the choice: cinema or learning for the MBA. Next week again, cinema or learning for the MBA. So once I'm on the path towards learning, my friends will not expect me anymore to go to the cinema with them. The momentum that drove me into regular weekly behavior has frizzled out, and the new momentum has become to automatically learn. So in this way, the current future starts reinforcing the ideal future. The logic of the momentum has become the logic of the ideal. There are still alternative possibilities that can occur along the way. So it is not a straight path towards the ideal future, because environmental changes may require that one deviates from the path at one stage or another, but one can always determine strategies to move around it towards the ideal future. Now, in an organization, once we have formulated ideals that we want to achieve as an organization, we need to structure the organization and the behavior of the parts and the members of the organization in such a way that they move towards the ideal future automatically, by default, like the current situation is moving into the current future by default. So we have to wire the organization towards managing ongoing change in a learning manner to achieve its ideal by default. And when we have achieved that, then we have a learning organization, and we have wired the organization for ongoing change. And this is the purpose of the program on organizational transformation. There are different ways that we engage with the current and with the ideal future as a person or a system. The current future pushes us into a particular direction. It pushes us through habits, through structure, through existing laws, existing plans, and so on. By comparison, the ideal future pulls us. It inspires us to formulate new strategies, make new plans, think differently. From a cognitive perspective, the current future has a current logic. It's the current thinking, the current worldview, the current mental models that perpetuate the current situation into a current future, while the ideal future requires a new logic. If you're looking from an emotional perspective, the current future arises passion. If we don't like the current situation, we are passionate about changing it. That is why, for example, revolutionaries are so passionate about what they're doing. They want to change the status quo. They regard it as unjust, as untenable, etc. By comparison, the ideal future arouses enthusiasm. The word enthusiasm comes from Greek, meaning God in us, and it means there's a larger force, an information field that inspires us to do things differently. By comparison, passion comes from Latin. It arouses suffering to change things, while enthusiasm is inspiration to do things differently. So according to the current and ideal future, we have two ways going into the future. We can create the future by default. This is the current future mode setting. We carry on as in the past. Or we deliberately design a future, an ideal future, to move into a direction that we find more desirable. Either way, it is our responsibility. So if we are having a current future that is undesirable, it is our responsibility, and if we are moving towards an ideal future, it is our responsibility. Ideally, of course, we will have a default set towards the ideal future, as I've explained in the last slide, that I'm automatically in my behavior informed and inspired by the ideal future and moving towards that, and that all my behavior becomes habitually that of creating the ideal future. If we don't have an ideal design, then we are likely to have a default setting that moves us into an undesirable current future. And this is expressed by the famous proverb, where there is no vision, the people perish. Eckhoff has another saying describing a similar thing: plan or be planned for. If we are not planning our lives for ourselves, others will plan for us and will make us do what they want to do. So it is our responsibility to create an ideal future. When we talk creating an organizational future or a societal future, it is our collective responsibility. It cannot be done by one person alone, but it is a collective, and it requires a formulation of an ideal future to which the collective agrees, around which the collective aligns, and then behaves towards it, co-produces it.